What defines a Bosnian Croat? Understandably a complicated subject. We must sort of establish a criteria in which coincides with contemporary ethnicities within BiH, which accurately defines the Proto-Croat political consciousness and in one which defines such a national feeling in the present day. One which causes people to define themselves as Bosnian Croats. To start, a general rule of thumb for Croats is that they are Catholic and of the Western cultural recension. In addition to this, most of these Croats typically speak the Croatian language, or Croatian recension of the Serbo-Croatian language. Such a language includes the supradialects of Kajkavski with the exception of those standardized by the Slovenian government and codified, and Stočaški. More specifically within Stočaški the Western retort most prevalent in former Vojna Krajina, present-day Kazinska Krajina and so on. It is important to note that this dialect in BiH is not objectively in Kazinska Krajina accepted as Croatian as it is spoken by Bosniaks. In addition to these statements, one may inquire, why must Croats be only Catholic? And how would we define Catholic Bosniak kings? We have answers for this as well with would sort of debunk misconceptions presented. Firstly, Croats are overwhelmingly but not exclusively Catholic as exceptions can be made. Which sort of disembowels the semi-accurate question presented above which is used as an example. For instance, in the early and mid-20th century, Bosnian Muslims had not yet been entirely developed with a political consciousness. With this in mind, we must take into account the fact that many Muslims enjoyed espousing an independent identity on the basis of their faith, as well as the Croatian identity and less commonly the Serbian one. Regardless, as a result of the breakup of Yugoslavia and Serbian Yugoslavism influencing the country's Muslims, the now Bosniaks accepted a new identity on the basis of an old civic identity shared in the past between all citizens of Bosnia. This is inherently irredentist and problematic for the existence of BiH as a state, but we will attack this issue later in the future. Regardless, an artificial cultural retort has been created in which has replaced the old consciousness with a new one, stripping it from the vast majority of Croats in which were of the Muslim faith, leaving only a barren minority. It is very easy to misinterpret this information, considering in the past the term Bosniak, which derives from the Bosna River, had been shared. For instance, such a thing is bolstered by Evlija Selebija and others like Mustafa Ali. Regardless of the origin of the contemporary Bosniak people, they must be differentiated from our historical definition, which was used to varying degrees until the early 19th century for any inhabitant of BiH. This differentiation does not exist on its own in its entirety, but rather the vast majority of historical value is stripped away and divided more evenly between the Croats and Bosniaks. That being said, these Croats and Bosniaks share a plethora of historical figures for this reason and an intertwined historiography. Regardless, the contemporary identity is intertwined with Islam, rather than the Bosnian and Roman Catholic churches respectively. This Islamic fundamentalism introduced to the Bosniak people has been detrimental to their aims of a citizen state. That being said, the incentives of the Croat and Bosniak people in their shared federation are inherently different. This has allowed for further ideological division of two previously indistinguishable identities. In other words, the Croats are the Roman Catholic successors of the Roman Catholic, Bosnian Church, and on rare occasion Muslim Bosniaks from the Middle Ages, while the contemporary Bosniaks are the successors of a population of such converted solely to Islam. Or to be more clear, Muslim Slavic people which were citizens of Bosnia ostracized by other forms of political rationalism. In regards to those Catholic Bosniak kings, it is good we have differentiated the previous basis for identification as the Bosniaks today are the partial successors of the previous Bosniak identity, as are the Croats. Only such an identity's previous definition had been almost synonymous with today's civic terminology for Bosnian. This is why there is no wonder we stumble across sources such as Bosniak Croats in Budapest. However, they are not entirely synonymous, and such is why both the Bosniaks and the Croat people have succeeded such a people group. This analysis of cultural retorts would not be possible without Croatian scientist Milan Saflej. Such is why we will read his explanation of such a theory. The Croatian people have passed through the Roman Western retort, while the Serbian people passed through the Byzantine Turkish. Therefore, the psyche of the two peoples is essentially different, even if the languages are similar. Unification of the two peoples would mean neutralization and careful constraining. To centralize here would mean to make Croatia a guinea pig for vivisection experiments. It is my thesis that the Croatian nation, as a citizen of the great empire of the Western civilization, has the right to raise its voice against any oppression. Such vivisection occurred with the Croat and Bosniak synthesis, split like an atom, which had created deadly effects in 1992. It therefore should go without mentioning that all we have to do is apply the logic taken here from this quote regarding the retorts and standardize it on the basis of the different South Slavic people inhabiting the Balkans. One of such people groups includes the Bosniaks, who have never had the literary justice of being examined with this. According to Vjekoslav Klejak, Catholics in BiH numbered to be 750,000 or 85.22% of the population in the 15th century, which included both Croats and some Vlachs, which in theory should have conformed to the Croat identity. According to other estimates, such as those conducted by Catholics, Orthodox practitioners and Muslims in both 1528 and 1624, which point to a rapid collapse in Catholics through arbitrary political debauchery and oppression wrought by the occupiers. In 1528, such estimates thus point to the population being 57% Catholic, as to where in 1624 it is estimated to have had been 22% Catholic, where it would stagnate up until its eventual collapse in 1992. Early Bosniak Croat history is devoid of Islam, thus lacking face value in our historiography. Such claims of pure succession are mere superficial delusions made to replace the current status meager of Bosniak literary history with a sound itinerary. Regarding the early literary history of Bosnian Muslims, it mostly blossomed in the 19th and 20th century, affected by Romantic nationalism. Those who failed to develop into such an identity as in those which remained reactionary, only identifying with their civic identity, are relatively negligible. The two main Bosnian Muslims of contemporary literary history, as previously mentioned, would be Savid Beg Basagic and Musa Kazim Katic. These two espoused a consciousness mixed but more orientated towards that of Croatdom. Thus, the early literary history of contemporary Bosniaks is inherently intertwined with that of the Bosnian Croats, as the Proto-Bosniak consciousness is thus one which is deriving its value from Croatdom in almost its entirety. Where it lacks Croatdom is its prominent Turkisms and on some occasions Serbisms, regardless if we were to somewhat graph these influences. It could be suggested that such Croatdom would dwarf the others as a result of the development of such a people being dependent on the Croatian people. While the Bosnian Croat literary past and historiography can arbitrarily be propagated as one which is dubious, it is clear to us that such a past is extremely diverse. It is also clear to us that Bosnian Croats are a modern geopolitical construct, as are the Bosniaks, which means both of such people more or less belong to the Croat people group. Vaguely we can apply this logic to Bosniaks considering the ostracization they faced.